Thank you. Hey, let's get started. We'll call to order the meeting of the Council Policy and Procedures Committee at 3:01. And we are expecting the third member any minute now, but we're going to get going. And we'll start with a roll call.
Great. Committee Member Higgs?
Here.
Chair Matichak?
Here.
And as noted, Committee Member Ramirez arriving shortly.
Okay, thank you. The first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from June 29th. Are there any corrections or comments on this?
No,
No?
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay, and do we have any members of the public? No? Okay, I don't see any here, so no virtual. Okay,
We are on YouTube, but as far as Zoom, no members of the public.
okay. Thank you. So I'll second the minutes and we'll just raise our hands. All those in favor?
I think it's two.
Yeah. Great, that passes unanimously. Next is item 4, oral communications. And this portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter that is not on the agenda. And I don't see any members of the public here in person. Has anyone joined virtually? Nope. Okay, so we will close that portion of the meeting and move on to item 5.1. And this next item is a continuation. Oh, and here's Councilmember
Okay.
Ramirez. Awesome, thank you. We just got to item 5.1. So as I was saying, this is a continuation of the item that we were discussing at our June meeting, and we didn't have time to finish our discussion. There were some things we wanted to talk about. So we're taking up the topic again. This was a referral from the City Council to clarify the policy regarding the election of mayor and vice mayor. Because the current policy, while it served us okay for many years, when we reread it, we realized it wasn't as clear as it could be. So we thought we should clarify it. So I think we'll start if we have any sort of presentation or comments from staff first.
So thank you, Natasha, from the City Attorney's Office. I'm going to very briefly review the discussion that we had back in June and go over some of bird's eye perspective, some of the proposed edits that I've put in here to address your comments and remarks. So to the extent possible, I try to rewatch the meeting minutes or rewatch the meeting video a few times and distill out what I thought there was clear. And those items have been the structure of the rules. They've been sort of put into their appropriate sections, because they were described, in a manner that had to be translated into an appropriate rule. So first and foremost, I think I heard a consensus from the committee that in order to be eligible as mayor or vice mayor, that the individual council member be elected by the voters and not recently recalled. So that has been tucked into the rules, and by necessity of how the rules are structured, it's actually separated into 2 separate components. You will see that first component on the very first page in our definitions. And now, in order for a city council member to be eligible, they must be someone who has been elected at least once in the preceding 10 years. And the reason why it's structured that way is because if anyone was elected in let's just say 8 years ago, and then they were not reelected, but then they were appointed, the committee last time was that that person was at least elected once by the public, and so they remain eligible. On the other hand, someone who was appointed several times over a 10-year period but never was elected should not be eligible. And so that's how that rule captures that commentary from the committee. Moving along, we corrected a discrepancy where it was not clear how the election for mayor and vice mayor should be agendized, so now they must appear sequentially. Just a minor sort of ministerial edit. There are a couple more of those that I won't go over, but for substantive rules now that the committee discussed, you will see at the top of page 3 that has not been recalled provision has now been inserted. And I placed in there in the preceding 4 years because that would be the relevant time span to effectuate the committee's desire to allow someone who gets recalled but then succeeds in getting reelected to remain eligible, right? So essentially imagine a situation where a council member is recalled 8 years ago, but then runs for the seat again 4 years ago and succeeds, they are now eligible again.
All the variables.
And another concern, which I heard from the committee, but I did not get a clear consensus answer, but I distilled out what I think was something of concern to everyone, and I think I came up with a solution, is that there was ambiguity as to what happens if every eligible person has already been mayor one time. So under subrule E, you will see that I've established a rotational cycle. Once all eligible individuals have been mayor at least once, the cycle begins again with the person who has had the longest gap between their first term as mayor and the current year. So essentially you would cycle through based on, just out of, I thought that was a way to fairly capture, both changes in the council and also to capture sort of a fairness that, if everyone's gone once and the person who's had the longest gap in their service between being mayor should be first up to be eligible. But that is something that if the committee wishes to change, I can take notes on what we prefer. And then another item that was left pending, the committee did not have an answer to the question of what would happen in the event that someone succeeds to the position of vice mayor or mayor, but only for a relatively short period of time to fill out someone else's term. So to cover that, under subrule F, you will see that I inserted that if a council member fills a vacancy for less than half a year, and for the purposes of explicit counting, I put 183 days to define half a year, that person then remains eligible. So for example, someone ascends to being mayor in October, they would remain eligible in January, the next January, right? That is something that I sort of borrowed from how other succession policies tend to function in other parliamentary bodies, but if the committee wants to recommend a change to that, I'm all ears. I just came up with it as a sort of solution that I thought would work. And then this is one correction that I will have to make before the rule set is finalized, but the version that is before you did not adequately capture the voting mechanism for both nomination and actual voting, but I think that's actually something that you all had still wanted to discuss. So with your feedback, I will incorporate those changes to the rules as well. And finally, you'll see here that the dais seating order, it currently takes effect on January 8th, 2025, but after looking at the calendar, it turns out that the first meeting it's just a peculiarity of the calendar that year, your first meeting to select the new mayor is going to be on January 9th. So I'm going to be changing that date to a date after January 9th. So that has been noted, and unless the body has a more particular date in mind, I'm probably going to be putting in January 15th, which would be the second full week of January.
So just for January, so the first meeting would be the second Tuesday in January. Just double checking.
And that's January 9th, right?
January 9th, 2024. This is just for the seating order.
Right, this is just for when the new seating
Oh,
order
right.
takes effect.
Right.
So do you want that to be 25 or 24?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Oh, right,
I had set it so that it was going to take
24.
effect after the next election,
right,
but
We
if
change
you
every year.
prefer-
yeah.
Right, if you prefer, I can change it to 24.
Yeah.
That's not a problem at all.
That's what I thought you intended.
Yeah,
Okay. That's.
I forgot what
that's
year
no
we were
problem.
in, so when I read 25, I thought that was next year.
Let's just skip 24.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they won't change theirs. order at the first meeting. They don't go into effect at the
So it would be the 23rd.
Okay. So I will change the date then to be January 15th, 2024.
Right. So what I would like to do, because I feel like this is kind of, oh, I'm sorry, were you done?
Yes.
Sorry, okay. Didn't interrupt you there. Let's keep track of the changes and then at the end summarize so that we make sure we've got it, so we don't have to do this again. Because, not that I mind doing this, but I feel like this is kind of a complex policy. And I want to make sure we all understand what it is and what it isn't. And so then the next step can be it goes to council. Why don't we start with, are there any questions, clarifying questions or general questions?
I just have a really, probably an easy question about what we just mentioned. Why are we making this effective in January? Why isn't it just after the meeting at which doesn't it become effective now? Not that we're going to switch places now, but after, even if it's effective now, after the meeting at which the selection of the mayor and vice mayor take place, that's not going to happen until 2024. So even if it's effective right now, we don't have to switch seats. And we don't know, this is not a big deal. This is like the smallest possible question, but just in case something happens and we pick a different meeting date for some reason, just if we make it effective now, I think.
So
Or is there a reason? There's probably some reason, are you?
that is a great question. The first draft of the rules from June actually did not have the effective date language.
Uh-huh.
But the committee did raise a concern that what if by some strange, happenstance, that there is an election for mayor or vice mayor between now and the normal date.
So like I quit.
Right.
Right.
And so to avoid that scenario, that is why
Okay.
the request was made to insert the
I mean,
date.
it's so small, I'm not gonna fiddle with it anymore at this point.
I see your point, though.
I don't have any
Questions? Okay, let's see, I don't think I had any questions. We'll open it up for public comment on this. Is there anyone, there's no one here in person, is there anyone online yet? Okay. Then we'll close public comment and then we can come back for discussion. So, I'm assuming everyone had a chance to read this. And then we can go through page by page if you want to, or if you just want to go through your items. Yeah, there's certain things you want to bring up.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So first, thank you for rewatching the meeting and capturing, this is, I didn't have a full appreciation for how challenging it would be to rewrite this policy until I think you and Councilmember Matishak and others had thought thoroughly through all the different permutations and possibilities. And so the conclusion I had come to is I just don't think we can realistically account for everything, right? There will always be, however small the chance, there's always a possibility that something that we hadn't foreseen, could come to pass and alter the way we would want to proceed with the selection process. I think there's certainly a lot of value in clarifying the policy where there are ambiguities. As I thought over the past a couple of months, I guess, about the impact of doing this now, the thing that I do have some heartburn about is if we were talking about this, in sort of a hypothetical, high level set of circumstances, I'd be a lot more comfortable with proceeding with a lot of the details that we talked about. But the concern I have is we're making some policy determinations that will affect likely the next selection process. And I would feel like if there were an obvious choice in the next election, it would concern me less. But for instance, in under the current policy, the appointed member of the council could take a leadership role. And we're making a policy decision that would explicitly prohibit the appointed council member from taking that leadership position. And I'm uncomfortable with that. I would rather we forward, so two options. One is we forward the policy as we've drafted it here with an effective date following the election. And then, I'm totally comfortable with how we've determined it here. Or we forward a policy that has the clarifications of the ambiguities and then provide the council with some additional policy considerations. And then the full council at least has an opportunity to say, we understand why, the committee might have felt that it was inappropriate to have an appointed member take on a leadership role, but at least the full council has an opportunity to opine as opposed to us making a policy determination. If this will almost certainly be placed on the consent calendar, I take it, right? That's typically what happens. And if we make a policy determination, I think we could count on it being pulled. And it feels like, a good way of approaching this would be, we've clarified the ambiguities. Staff and the committee has thoroughly thought through a number of different circumstances and permutations where things might go awry. So we forwarded something that's very thoughtful. And also, here are some policy determinations that the full council may want to consider. Is it appropriate for an appointed member of the council to ascend to a leadership role without first getting elected by the people? I think either of those I'd be comfortable with, and I'm interested in hearing your thoughts.
I have a question particularly about that comment. I don't know what you mean by clarify ambiguities. You mean in this? I thought that's what happened between the two. So I just don't understand. There are additional ambiguities that
There were-
need to be in what's written now?
No.
Oh,
So what I mean is the original policy was ambiguous,
Okay.
which is why the chair and staff spent a lot of time talking about
Okay.
how do we make sure that there are no ambiguities and it's very clear how
I
the
thought you meant
situation.
current ambiguities.
No. I think
Said,
the
"Please
bulk of the
point
policy
them
is
out."
very good. The bulk of the policy, I think, is very clear. But there are some policy determinations that personally I feel uncomfortable recommending, forwarding. So taking them and putting them with an effective date after the election, I'm totally comfortable with, or, forwarding the clarified policy with some alternatives that are sort of policy determinations in nature, and then have the full council determine whether we want to enact a policy that will alter how the selection process next year would go.
So are there any there's one policy decision that jumps to the forefront for me, and that's an appointed person becoming vice mayor or mayor. Are there other ones, or is that the only one you're talking about?
That's the most significant.
Is there one of secondary significance?
If the council elects to not allow an appointed member to ascend to a leadership position, there's not an ambiguity, but there is a policy decision about who the next in line would be, right? It's at once a clarification of an ambiguity. There is no clear next in line. So we've made a policy determination that is explicitly spelled out here, right? I think if I were to summarize in very, plain language, it would be a member of the council where there's been the greatest amount of time since they've served as mayor. That would be the policy determination. But that only matters if the council decides that an appointed member of the council is ineligible.
In this case, but some other year it might be something else.
In some other year, I don't really care. It's just that we're making a policy determination. Like right now, I think there's something close to a prescribed formula, right? We have one member of the council who has not served in a leadership role, right? So under the current policy, because there's no prohibition, that member would become vice mayor.
So your problem is because we're talking about this in terms of Emily Ramos rather than Jane Doe, and in the future it'll be Jane Doe.
Right.
I mean, I can make a comment on that. So to me, we should be thinking about this in terms of Jane Doe. But it doesn't matter, although the situation we see in front of us now, when we read this through, we think, oh, so that person would be, and a name comes to mind. That would be Emily, that would be Lisa, that would be Margaret, that would be me if I quit right now, like we just said. Particular names come to mind. In the future, particular names will be involved, we just don't know who they are. And so I'm not understanding why if particular, and in the future, you might look at this and say, 5 years from now, the people who come up under this rubric, issues come to mind. And I don't think they'd be that different than now. So I'm not sure why it would be problematic now and not in the future, or maybe different issues would come up because we can't foresee all the possibilities. So I'm not sure why it's a problem when we know who it involves, but it's not a problem in the future just because we don't know the names of the people. Not just the names, who they actually are. I can see bringing this back to council, but I'm not sure, your reason for it is not appealing to me. And did I have a second comment? Well, if I did, I'll bring it up later.
Yeah, so, clearly this will go to the full council. And, I don't think any of us are shy about pulling items
Right.
from the consent calendar. So I would imagine it would be pulled. Because it's probably worth a discussion. But I do tend to agree, actually, when we were going through different scenarios, we actually started out with completely different names that had nothing to do with the current council members. And we're saying, okay, this person, was in this year of their tenure on the council, and we went round and round and round, and it was only then later that we thought about the current council members. So we were kind of doing the Jane Doe scenario when we were going through scenarios at the beginning. And I feel very compelled to clarify this policy because there was quite a bit of churn going on in the background before the last election of mayor and vice mayor, and I kind of like to avoid that. And so that's why I felt like we really needed to clarify this. And I've had a number of folks comment about how they did feel like it was very important for actually even an appointment to the council for the person to have been elected. And to me, that carries over to the person needs to at least have been elected once to the Mountain View City Council to serve in a leadership role. But this wouldn't preclude, if you do want to focus on names, they run and they get elected. And then they could. It also would not preclude, if I understand this correctly, if in the next election, somebody who has previously served as vice mayor or mayor could, and I want to make sure I understand this correctly, they could actually be elected as mayor and not serve as vice mayor. Is that true?
So you're
Under
saying
this
like
current
if
policy?
Art Takahara
Yes.
ran
Yes,
and was elected, he could become mayor.
right off the bat. But yeah, that's what I thought it said. And I thought about that and I thought, well, they've served before as mayor or vice mayor, both. And so I guess I don't have a problem with them serving again in that role. They wouldn't have to be vice mayor before they became mayor. Because last time we talked about, we would probably run into the scenario more frequently where we kind of have a hole, so to speak, and we'd have to figure out how to fill it. And that would be one way if somebody was elected who had been in the leadership role before. So I actually feel okay with this. Now that I had that clarification, because I was a little bit concerned that we might not have somebody. And I guess that could still happen. If somebody, there's so, like I said last time, there are so many scenarios of how this could play out.
Or even just having a vacancy in the first place, that's very hard to predict if and when that
Yeah.
were to ever occur.
Yeah.
Too, so.
Yeah.
You're saying when a council person would quit.
Yeah, or like what happened previously, which is what led us to you all appointing a council member. No one could predict, certain situations
Right.
that may happen if a council member were to leave for whatever reason. But what we have now is that everyone, save for one member, has served as mayor before. And then in the next cycle, even in next year's election, those that would be in line have served as mayor before.
Yeah, I guess what informs me on this is that I was contacted. I was not, after Sally stepped down, I did not know how common appointments were. And but I was contacted by a lot of members of the public who were really didn't want us to appoint someone, really wanted us to have an election.
Yep.
And or really wanted us to have some kind of process that would give more time, which we were not able to do. And so that, I think that's what people really felt like it wasn't legitimate if we appointed someone. And then after I looked into it more and found out how common appointments were, I was like, I feel like called everybody back and said, what's, what we're doing is not that unusual. But I did get the feeling that the public really wants somebody to be elected. And frankly, it was reinforced for me when most of the people, when the person we eventually appointed, most of the people in the audience speaking up for her were not our residents. So I feel like, honestly, I feel like I like working with all of our current council. And I feel like, and I want anybody who becomes the next mayor, I want the public to feel like it's a legitimate process. And I feel like it would undermine Emily, frankly, given the way she was appointed, if it doesn't go through a process like this. And not just her, but any Jane Doe or what is it, Joe Doe or whatever. John Doe.
John Doe.
John Doe.
Joe Doe.
But I like JoJo.
I feel like, and I also feel like if you're running for office and you're mayor and you weren't elected when you've been criticized for that to begin with, I just feel like it's really delegitimizing and would cause a lot of upheaval in the community, which I don't need. I want it to be a process that people see as legitimate.
Well, I might lose this vote, and that's okay. I don't want to belabor the point. I think what I'm, and just to clarify, Emily would not be mayor next year, right?
Correct.
That would be.
Or vice mayor
So,
is
yeah.
what I should have said, sorry.
So I think that's a valid policy perspective to have, right? I could understand it. The concern I have is it feels like, right? Let's say the council really didn't like me, right? So instead of having a hard conversation, and that might be true for all I know, right? So self-centered. But like instead of, during the selection process saying, even though Lucas is next in line, we feel there are compelling reasons why he shouldn't be vice mayor or mayor, right? And then having that conversation there, it's we're going to change the policy in advance of the selection process specifically to make sure Lucas doesn't become vice mayor or mayor. It's more of a perception thing. It doesn't quite feel right, which is why I would rather advance it as a separate policy consideration. Like the intent of this is very good. Clarifying the ambiguities, I think, is really important. This is not an ambiguity, right? This is a policy decision, and it's an important one. And I think there are valid perspectives on each side of it, but I feel like it's beyond the scope of clarifying. It's saying, we really don't think an appointed member of the council should serve in leadership for perfectly valid reasons. It's just, if we had done this before Sally stepped off, I would feel more comfortable than now that we have an appointed person who has a name. It kind of feels a little, it's not intended to be, it feels a little mean-spirited.
Yeah, I'll take a turn here. I certainly don't feel like we are trying to be mean-spirited,
Right.
which it shouldn't come, I'm hoping it doesn't come across that way. But I had a similar experience that the mayor shared, where after the appointment, quite a few people contacted me. Actually, a lot of people contacted me before saying, please do a special election. I felt like that was overwhelming, but we didn't go that route. And then, I think most people would have preferred an appointment of somebody who had been elected before, because at least they would have gotten a say. And so I can understand your comments about, the same thing sort of applies here, that, how would they feel about having someone who has not been elected be either vice mayor or mayor? And I don't think that would go over very well with our residents. I am trying to separate the person from the policy here. And I do believe that way, no matter who it is, that I feel like our residents were pretty clear that they wanted people who had been elected before. So I'd actually be okay if we, obviously we have a little bit more to discuss on this, but sticking with we forward a proposed policy, because this is a policy, it's a tweaked policy, changed policy, clarified policy, lots of different things, with a new one with seating. And then if the council wants to discuss it, they could pull it and discuss it. And I'm guessing we might do that.
I don't know if I will. I mean, I feel like the advantage of being on this committee is I get to have my say, and I could lose a vote, and that's fine. I want to be clear. I didn't mean to insinuate that there's anything mean spirited here. It's just
I take it that way. Yeah.
it's a difficult policy decision.
Yeah.
I want to be careful of a future circumstance, right, where there may not be a valid policy determination. It's we don't like somebody, so we're going to change the policy so we can get around them. I would personally I would support and feel more comfortable with advancing the clarifications and then adding, so it wouldn't be a consent item, it would be new business or but however that would be categorized with, we discussed this, we think, these clarifications make sense, but we do think it's important for the full council and also the members of the public who have interest in this to weigh in on the policy consideration of, is it appropriate to have, an appointed member of the council who has not been elected previously serve in a leadership role. And Emily might have thoughts too. She may agree with you. I don't really know. So if it's, forwarded as is, I probably couldn't support it. But if there is here's language prepared, that we've thought through, it's a different policy question, but it's important and it's relevant. And at least the council has an opportunity the full council has an opportunity to weigh in. I think I could be comfortable with that.
Okay, so before we decide on that, are there any other areas that you want to talk about?
Honestly, I think it's very well thought through.
Yeah. I could think about this for a very long time and come up with more scenarios. Did you have any others?
No, I had other thoughts, but they are completely take us in another direction. So I just think also the fact that several council members were only mayor and vice mayor virtually is something that I think about in terms of picking who would be next. And that's not in this policy at all, and I don't think I want to put it in, but it does come to mind. That people weren't, I feel like certain people were not full mayors. I mean, I've never talked to you about that, but I have talked to Ellen about that. That she was like half mayor, so virtual mayor. So, that comes to mind as a consideration, but I'm not going to put policy about that in here.
So I do have a couple of questions, and I appreciate you listening to the meeting again and doing this. Reading this draft for us. So on the top of page 3, want to be really, really clear. Does this cover, it says the highest ranking member of the council who has not yet served as mayor in their current consecutive years of service and has not been recalled in the preceding 4 years, rotates into the mayor. So, I think we had talked about, and we also wouldn't want somebody who had failed to be reelected. So is that in here, or is that covered, or is it, did you
So-
think better of that?
The way that the rule edits kind of work, it's that it is a little bit unclear because they address the circumstances as they are likely to arise rather than in one succinct situation. So for example, the recalled rule applying 4 years retroactively. Essentially, if someone had been recalled more than 4 years in the past, and then for whatever reason, they were appointed but not elected, they would not be eligible because they would have never been elected, right? So they would not be eligible for mayor or vice mayor. On the other hand, if they were then elected after a recall, that addresses the committee's concern that once they've been reelected by the public, they have sort of passed the legitimacy bar that you were describing with the public. So that's how that sort of addresses both circumstances that can arise before and after a recall. I hope that answered your
So
question.
I guess to me, recall is different than failing to be reelected.
Right, so if they had, because the feedback I received from the committee in June was that if someone had lost an election and then had been appointed, there was actually no consensus on how that situation should be addressed. And so right now, there is no rule to address that situation. The most likely outcome in that situation is that that person would not have enough seniority because their days of service would be lower. They would have a break. And the first rule is that they have to have the most consecutive days, right? So if you have a break in service, you're already going to be fairly low in the ranking. So that's the most realistic way that that would play out. But if the committee has a more specific rule it would like, I'm happy to amend it.
Then make a recommendation.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think that the votes might be different on the totality of the policy, but I think in the spirit of the intent, as I was thinking about this, any appointed member, regardless of whether they were previously elected or not, probably should be ineligible for the leadership role, right? Because even if you've been elected and reelected, there's no guarantee that the voters still support you. And we had an instance in 2018, right, where a member, somebody who had served in the council for 8 years tried to get back for a third term and was dead last. So just because you've been reelected doesn't necessarily mean that you retain the support of the community. So I feel the simplest way is just to say, if you've been appointed, regardless of whether you've been elected before, you're not eligible until you have been elected.
Yeah, I would endorse that.
That is a very easy change to make.
And so you have been currently elected.
Right.
Sorry, I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
Current term of office.
Right.
Yes. I'm okay with that.
And I would clarify that about the current term of office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that there's no ambiguity about being elected in a prior term.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's see. And then on page 3 again, E, the part highlighted in yellow. I read that several times, and I know we talked about this briefly right before the meeting. And I guess I read this as, the day their service was complete. And I thought my day, like, for example, the time when I finished being a council member or mayor. So
Oh,
should
I
it
see.
say
Okay. So that I can,
your service as mayor?
yes, service as mayor.
Yes.
that I can clarify.
Y'all know how I love to wordsmith. That's
Yeah, there's
important.
also
So
an- Oh, sorry, I thought.
We did catch the typo.
we did
yes,
catch the typo. Yes.
Thank you.
You see the typo?
The typo here.
The B, yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Shall be.
Shall be served. Served as moved.
Yes.
I don't have a problem with words smithing incidentally, because the intent is, you know, we should,
Clarify.
yeah, right? Once it's
Exactly.
clarified, hopefully we don't have to revisit this, you know, for quite some time.
And then we had previously said we were gonna move something, but I talked before the meeting and we said, oh no, it makes more sense to leave it here because of other changes that have happened. I appreciated the ad at the bottom of the page about 183 days. I thought that was a good, start. And I guess, it still says in all of this somewhere that the council can choose to do something
Yes,
different.
whatever they want.
Whatever they want, but here's a straw man for them. Let's see. And then when it came to the, let's see, on page 2, sorry, I'm going backwards. Section D about a motion and a second is not in order for this process. Because what we typically do is we say, I nominate so-and-so, and somebody will second it. And then we ask if there's any more nominations. And since I've been watching council, I've never seen more than one nomination. But I guess that could happen. And so then, I think I brought this up last time, if we wanted to clarify what would happen if there were more than one nomination. And I think we briefly talked about this, but did it make it to this version? It didn't.
So
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
very briefly, unfortunately, in editing this multiple times, some language did get dropped accidentally.
No worries.
And so to just briefly describe what had been captured is there was some language under subrule 1C that essentially stated that the initial motion would just be to follow the policy, right? In which case, the mayor and vice mayor positions would be predetermined by the policy. And that motion would just carry through, and that is one simple vote.
But you don't say, if I were the person doing it, I wouldn't say, I make a motion to follow the policy. I would name the person. Right? Okay,
Right,
good, good.
right.
Yes, because essentially you don't have to follow this
Right,
policy,
right.
and that's, where a second nomination would come in, and it would be if there's a
Right.
little bit of mutiny.
Right.
And someone doesn't want to follow the policy,
Right.
so they would nominate an alternate choice.
I have a question of clarification. We always have in the past, or am I remembering wrong? We've had a person make a motion and second in the past, haven't we? That's what I remember.
We've said I nominate.
Yeah.
I don't know if
So-
it was,
If I may, some changes to C and D that might be helpful. I don't know, Chair, if you wanted to read them or.
Go ahead.
So right now it says at the close of the public comment period, the floor shall be open to nominations for mayor. And then instead of a period, it would go on to say pursuant to the informal rotation outlined in section 2 of this policy. A motion and a second for the member next in rotation shall be made and a vote would be in order. Upon receiving a majority vote of the council, that member would be selected for mayor. And then D would read, the council may determine by majority vote that it will entertain additional nominees. If more than one nomination is made, each council member shall vote for one nominee of their choice by ballot. Ballots will be collected and the city clerk will publicly announce each council member's vote. The nominee receiving a majority vote of the council will be selected for mayor. The only issue that could come up there is how you want to handle a situation where every person votes for themselves. Which I've seen happen.
Oh dear.
That's Malibu.
So I don't know if you want to be that prescriptive or just hope that there's a bit more, that you only get like 2 nominations to vote on, or, that you don't get a majority where you get 4 or more nominations is where you have the problem.
Wow. So I haven't seen that here, but I guess it could happen.
I'm not wishing that on you. I'm just
Thank you.
I'm just proposing a possible,
into me.
yeah, a possible kink in this.
Seven
Yes.
nominees.
In this plan.
So let's see.
So the end of that, I have in the event no nominee
Wait,
receives.
which
a-
page, I'm getting a little lost, which page? you're
Oh,
on?
this is just changes to D that kind of really just memorialize
Oh, okay.
how you've been doing votes by ballot, right?
Mhm.
If no one gets a majority vote for someone, then you go back to the table and you re-vote until somebody gets a majority vote. But the question is, how do you handle it if you get 4 nominations?
So so what are you proposing for that? Because you could just say you can't have more than 3 nominations.
Well, no, because if everyone makes nominations, you could wind up with
Right.
quite a few nominations, depending on the climate.
I mean, I guess what I'm proposing is that, when we're discussing, other issues, one person makes a motion, if Lisa makes a motion and I was just about to, I mean, I can,
Do a substitute.
right, do a substitute motion, but essentially she got there first. So you could just say the first 3 people, you get there first, you stop it. But you think that's not legitimate?
No, I just, based on the conversation you all had last time, there was appetite for continuing the process that you have now so that you're not doing roll call votes, right?
Mhm.
Where everyone can kind of hear what everyone else's vote is gonna be. So you have ballot,
Mhm.
but
But your ballot would have to be for
Yeah.
the people who had been nominated, as opposed to just anybody.
right,
And so you're suggesting we limit it to 3 nominations or some
If
number.
more than 3 becomes problematic, we could limit it to 3.
Well, but can you, right? Can a policy prohibit a member of the council from? I mean, it's not, I guess, it's how prescriptive is this, right?
We may not want to go that deep. If
Yeah.
if you
if you get to that point, then.
yeah.
There are other
If you
problems.
get to that point and there's 7 nominees for mayor, I have a lot of jokes about that one.
She's like, also I
will
tender
refrain
my.
from this meeting.
Yeah, right.
I've got
Then the city
bigger issues
manager
going
becomes the
on.
mayor.
So it may be good to just stop there and hope for the best.
So do you want to read that again? So
Yes.
for C,
So,
Oh.
there I have the
Yeah, go ahead.
bigger font version, so you're not straining your eyes. So essentially, and this is language that was supposed to be in this version. Apologies to everyone for not having it. So beginning with C, I'm going to read C in its totality as it will appear as a final rule. At the close of the public comment period, the floor shall be open for a nomination for mayor pursuant to the informal rotation outlined in section 2 of this policy. A motion and a second for the member next in the rotation shall be made and a vote will be in order. Upon receiving a majority vote of the council, that member will be selected for mayor.
so that's clarification of what we currently do. Okay.
That's the.
That sounded like what we currently do, right?
And then for D, which now explains the scenario where we have 7 nominees for mayor. The council may determine by majority vote that it will entertain additional nominees. If more than 1 nomination is made, each council member shall vote for 1 nominee of their choice by ballot. Ballots will be collected and the city clerk will publicly announce each council member's vote. The nominee receiving a majority vote of the council will be selected for mayor. In the event no nominee receives a majority vote, the council members will vote again until 1 nominee receives the majority vote.
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that. Okay. Thank you.
We've been there before.
Okay, I think that was all I had. So then let's get back to the issue of how do we want to proceed? Do we want to take this proposed policy and have it on the consent calendar? Somebody pulls it and we talk about it? Or do we want to propose, I guess it would be a modification to what we just put together, and then say, and then an option is, or just not have something in here and have, here's a couple of options. Thoughts on that?
With the couple of options you're saying on the consent calendar or as a regular item?
Well, I don't think it could be on the consent calendar if we have options. Yeah.
Right.
So it would be a regular item.
So typically you would want to at least have a recommendation because otherwise it's a study session. So I
Okay.
think where the committee is gonna have to land is making a recommendation to your colleagues, so that could be to either, you know, accept the policy as you all have discussed, or to consider the policy that you're putting before them for council discussion, for full council discussion. That's an option, but you wouldn't not, or you wouldn't bring them something with no recommendation.
So I kind of feel like since odds are it's going to be pulled, that we should have a discussion. So I'm okay putting forth, I guess I would say, put forth this and then have, but, you know, let's talk about this because it is a change to a policy. And an alternative is not a change, and have the wording ready for that.
So putting this, so if I get this right, you're saying, put this as an agenda, regular agenda item with the staff recommendation like this, and then with a secondary option. Yeah, I would, was that a motion that you just made?
Well, it would be the CTC. committee.
Yeah, it wouldn't be staff, it would be the
Okay.
CTC.
Yeah,
CPBC.
sorry, CPPC.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I
It's
just
been
went
a
right along
long,
with
knew
that.
what you meant.
sorry, yes, CPPC.
Yes.
So was that a motion that you made?
Sure.
Okay, then I would second it.
Okay. All those in favor? Okay, that's 2-1.
And is the committee okay with us looking at the TAL to see which meeting in October, just timing wise, to kind of balance what's on the agenda or what isn't yet on the agenda that we might need to balance this with? Okay.
So should I clarify that in case somebody's watching and didn't see hands or something? So that was 2 in favor, Mayor Hicks and Councilmember Bowcheck, and 1 opposed, Councilmember Ramirez. Just for
So is staff
clarification.
clear about the staff report, what we're bringing forward?
Natasha's gonna be lead on the report. You've got it
Chair
all.
Natasha, do you want to repeat it?
Do you want to repeat?
You wanna help?
I think what I heard is the rules with the election process clarification we read into the record as the committee recommendation, and then
Alternative.
alternative to be discussed by the full council.
Mhm.
The alternate being not a change.
Right. Not- the alternate
That's
is not a
one-
change.
One,
Yes.
one iteration.
Yes.
I
Although
mean,
the council could do anything.
when you say, just to clarify, like the clarifications are a change, but it's not the policy determination, right? So I think as an alternative, are we saying no change to the policy, or here's the clarifications, but without the question about the alternate or the appointed member issue?
So it would be the clarifications.
Okay.
To the policy, and then not changing the specific area when it comes to who can serve in a leadership role.
Got it. Okay.
Yes,
Perfect.
yes,
Thank you.
yes. Okay, anything else on this one?
Thank you for delving through it. Not easy.
Thanks, Natasha, I appreciate it.
Yeah,
And
no,
Heather
thanks.
and everyone else
We'll
who.
do the minutes as well. Yes, of course.
I might need the video very
Yeah,
soon.
probably the video.
sorry, let me get back to the agenda
No,
here.
it's just another, one more brief item.
Okay, 5.2, an update on.
Yes, so as you're aware, we provide this update at each meeting for the committee. And this is an update that includes the 2 items that you just completed on your agenda, which includes today. And then we have 4 items that are pending before the committee for this fiscal year. And those items are noted in the staff report. I'll highlight them here, which is the council policy A15, that's the ticket distribution associated with Shoreline. There were some updates that need to be made to that policy, as well as 2 that are related to financial areas. And that's council policy A11 related to financial and budgetary policy. And then council policy A10, that is the authorization to execute city contracts and agreements and increase certain appropriation appropriations. That will also be brought forward for an update. We anticipate 2 and 3 will come in tandem. And then we, in addition, is just your routine item, which is updating you on various topics. So at each meeting, we'll continue to keep this so that you have a good tracking on what items are coming before you.
Okay,
And that concludes staff's brief report.
thank you. Any questions or comments?
Oh, go ahead.
No, I don't have them.
Oh, sorry. I'll be quick. So is, I know there's something going before the council finance committee. Is that the same thing as council policy A11 or is there a different?
I think it may be, although I'm not sure. So I would need to clarify that with our finance administrative services director. And I'd be happy to do so.
Okay, well, so no disrespect to the mayor, but 2 of us also serve on the CFC and I would hate to bring the same item between 2 substantially similar bodies.
Like I said, I would need to follow up, and I'm not sure if the city manager McCarthy is aware of that item coming before the finance committee.
I need to clarify too. It's been a while since I looked at
Okay.
these 2 items, so I would just want to make sure, especially since council just gave direction during the budget hearing. And so I want to make sure that what we were planning to bring to the council finance committee may be different or not
Okay.
than these 2 items. I want to say vaguely that I think 3 is more about, and we've all talked about this before, my authority, department head authority. And I don't believe that was going to the finance committee. The number 2, I'm not sure. It's because it's very vague. So I need to just double check that one.
Okay, and my understanding matches City Manager McCarthy on item 3. And then for item 2, I understood that to be routine cleanup changes. So I don't necessarily think it's the item associated with the
CFC.
finance committee, but it could be. So we'll clarify.
Okay, if it is the same as what's going to the CFC,
Right.
I would, since you're also the chair of the CFC, right?
I don't remember.
If you're
Now
the,
you are.
right, well, if you are, I would suggest, talking with staff and you can make the determination about whether it's more appropriate to go to PPC or CFC.
Okay.
For the same anyway.
And this memo is reviewed by our department heads, but we'll re-clarify just for
Okay.
sure.
Cool, thank you.
That's a good point, but yeah, I didn't.
Spare yourself the trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so, anything else on that? No? Okay, then I think we're all moving on to the next item is to adjourn.
Committee,
Oh, sorry, forgot about that. Any committee reports, anything else? Did you have anything else? Okay, now we're ready to adjourn at 3:59.
All right.
I have to go back to San Jose.